Now, this is a first steps video after all, so I'm going to try and keep this as simple as I can by saying that if you inherit an isolated pawn in the opening, however, in whichever way, you better have compensation for it. And that compensation usually takes the form of active pieces. This is a concept which we can use throughout the game, in the opening, the middle game and the end game. If you have pawn weaknesses, you have to have compensation for them. Let's take a look now at another very interesting game which comes from the European Team Championship in 2013 between Grandmaster Daniel Fridman and Giles Nigalidze, whose grade is 2494. I'm not sure what title he owns. I presume he's an IM at least. And it's a game in which black falls into a very well concealed opening trap, and as a result has to deal with a horrible pawn structure which he cannot dissolve. Now, you would never believe that there was going to be something sharp or unusual in the opening, as in the Slav defence to the Queen's Gambit, Fridman plays knight bd2, which looks like the quietest move in the world. Now, one of the points of this move is to dissuade black from taking on c4. If black takes on c4 in the usual style of the Slav, white can recapture with the knight. And white has strong control over e5. The main notion is it's quite difficult for black to free himself in a position like this. So knight bd2 already introduces an unusual twist. But I mean, you just think that that move wasn't right. It doesn't look right somehow, because the disadvantage is clear. White's slowing down his development. Nevertheless, there are concealed pitfalls for black. All right, black plays bishop f5. Well, that's the usual Slav location for this bishop. One of the main advantages of the Slav is that black keeps the bishop's diagonal open, so why not put it on a good square? Seems very logical. Yet, in this position, I think the best way is to play e6 and then c5, which transforms the position into a type of Catalan or Tarrasch defence, where white's knight on d2 is misplaced. I think as long as black avoids taking on c4 early, then he can count on a good game. And this way round, we see black developing his knight to c6. I don't mind black in this position. I mean, how is white going to get his queen side out? This seems to point up the inefficiency of white's opening idea. But bishop f5, Nigalidze is tempted, and who wouldn't be? Okay, Fridman plays knight h4. Well, perhaps seeing what's coming up, black should also play in an unstereotyped fashion and maybe retreat his bishop to e6. It looks very weird, you know, the knight on h4 versus the bishop on e6. But after bishop g6, as played in the game, Fridman played queen b3. And this is suddenly quite tricky for black to meet, as the natural move, queen b6, is going to fall straight into white's trap. Now, queen b3, well, again in the Slav, you will know that when the bishop leaves home early, b7 becomes weak. So white is focusing on that pawn. Black certainly doesn't want to go playing moves like b6 in this position. That just creates horrible white square weaknesses on the queen side. But maybe after queen b3, black should try queen c7. Sometimes there are tricks in the Queen's Gambit when black plays queen c7. White plays a sudden bishop f4 and black is in trouble. But here, with no bishop f4 available, well, black should be okay. I mean, white can settle for knight takes g6 and just go g3 with a slight edge. I think that's what Fridman would have done. But it's not as bad as the game for black, as you're going to see. Because black falls straight for this trap. He plays queen to b6, which looks the most natural move in the world, and now queen to h3. Suddenly sets up horrible threats. Number one threat, queen c8 check. Bang. Horrible. Number two threat, knight takes g6, which forces black to take with the f-pawn. Exactly what he doesn't want to do. Well, knight bd7. I've no doubt at all that Nigalidze was surprised. How can I get into this mess after only 7 moves? When I ran this through the computers, they suggested knight a6 as the best try for black, presumably with knight b4 in the offing. Then I think white should just lop off the bishop, f takes, and he's already damaged the black pawns. Then c5, closing things down, and maybe even e4. A very good move here, so that after knight takes e4, we take on a6. Knight takes d2, bishop takes d2, b takes a6, and then castle on the queen side. Black is a pawn up, but just look at his pawn structure. It's completely in ruins. Two sets of double pawns. White has tremendous pressure down the e-file. Just a move like rook hg1 will expose all of black's weaknesses. I think we can say that after queen h3, black is already and suddenly in trouble. So what black played knight bd7, white took on g6, black recaptured. White played e3. There's no rush now. And black plays c5. Black's trying to get some compensation for his weak pawn structure by activating his pieces. Fridman decided to take on c5. Black recaptured with the knight. C takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop c4, and now black plays e6. And so we see here that out of the opening, black has inherited an isolated pawn. He's got a double pawn couplet here, which I'm going to be speaking of soon, and he's got no way to get rid of those pawn weaknesses. Hence, white is, if not winning, then certainly much better here. Now, white has, as you might expect, a choice of good moves. I mean, Fridman settles for castles. That's what good players do, you know, that when they build up a good position out of the opening, they stick to simple play. In good positions, why gamble? Why take chances? Why go for sharp continuations? It's only in bad positions you should do something like that. Yet e4 was probably good as well. Now, I'm sure he didn't do that because of knight f4, queen f3, and then some move like bishop d6. It looks as though black is, with castles coming up, getting some activity. But specifically here, I think white can go g3. And if knight check, bishop takes, rook f8, which is probably what Fridman didn't like. Queen e2, takes, queen takes f2 check. Black's position is so fractured that white can even afford to play like this. I mean, after all, white's a piece up in this position. So what is black to do? If he castles, then I think we can go queen e2. I think Fridman didn't play this way simply because he didn't want to take any risks. I mean, the king on d1, there might be some small risk. Black might get some cheapos going. So instead, white whisks his king away to safety and says to black, well, I'm just going to win this game technically. Black, for his part, well, he can't do very much. He's just got to develop and hope that something turns up. Knight to b3, very sensible. Knight takes b3. Well, again, that's rather compliant. My notes suggest that castling is rather better. But there, I suppose, white would exchange. And now you can choose between b3 or even the sharp b4, with the idea of bishop takes b4, rook to b1. But there's no need for white to play as sharply as this. Nevertheless, this is an interesting way. Let's go back to the game. Knight takes b3, bishop takes b3. Black castles, white plays e4. That was inevitable. And black tries to bail out into the opposite colour bishop endgame here, with all the pieces coming off, and now bishop d5. And I don't know whether black thought he was drawing this position, but I think it was a clear misjudgment if he did. The problem is white's still got the initiative. Black's king is worse placed than white's king. In a position with opposite colour bishop, the initiative is the key. And white has a clear highway into black's position. Virtually black's only point of contact with white's position is f2, and that's a very easy pawn to defend. Moreover, white has a passed pawn in the centre, which he's going to push in due course and to tie black down. So all in all, I think a pawn down for nothing in this position is very bad for black indeed, if not just totally lost. Well, black played rook f6. White went rook c1 to take the file. Black brought his rook across, a nice easy move by white. Black protected against rook c7, but now rook c3. Excellent play, making the rook as mobile as possible. That rook may swing across the third rank at a moment's notice. White may even double on the c-file. King e7, and now noting that the position has changed, the tactical move e5, and that was enough to persuade Nigelidze to resign. The problem is this forces penetration to the 7th rank by a white rook. For instance, let's go through this. If black takes on e5, rook e1, already this is awkward for black. And if rook b5 here, then bishop c4, rook c5, and now this cute move b4, deciding the game. Let's go on with this, if king f6, we take the rook, he takes here. So an excellent little game there by white. And now let me just summarise this small section on isolated pawns. So isolated pawns, usually weak. If you've got them, you need to keep the pieces on, you need to aim for the attack to develop the initiative. That's true in all phases of the game. Or you can try to dissolve them, to get rid of them. If you're fighting against them, you want exchanges, you want to blockade them, you want to try to dampen down the enemy initiative, which is not always easy to do. In general, we prefer to attack rather than to defend. Isolated queen's pawn positions are worth studying in depth, so I will commend you to that thinking as we move on to another section.